Webs. Arc 1. Cambrian. Chapter 2. I've never really liked capes. To me, the whole thing was this weird joke. You've got all this power, and you run around like an idiot in a silly costume, fighting other guys in silly costumes until you all die fighting a colossal monster. There were a few exceptions to that, I understood, but as a whole, it just looked like a joke to me. But now at least, I was beginning to see the fun in telling that joke. The fun you could have on the other side of the mask. This whole cape thing so far has been a blast. I started out posting videos of my web swinging in costume to a new PHO account, itsy bitsy underscore Spider-Man, and I had gotten a lot of fans really quickly. People seemed to respond well to my whole vibe. I was treating it like the joke it was, and people who got it really liked my content. I pivoted away from just swinging and started doing challenge videos. I even ran into an actual villain once or twice. Spider-Man vs. the Death Killer was still sitting as my number one upload with around 2 million views. Online video stuff was still kind of new, so there wasn't exactly a way to monetize it yet, but it felt good to blow up like that. I still don't know if Death Killer was going for an irony thing like I was, or if he actually was serious about the Killer of Death thing. If the guy was actually serious, he was oddly harmless for a guy who had crammed Death and Killer into his name. Cool power though. Maybe when I had a bit more time, I could try and base a gadget on it. For now though, I'm focused on suiting up. I just hit 500,000 followers and needed to make a new video to celebrate. I started with my hoodie. Since it was the only part of my ensemble, aside from my shoes, that didn't have any tinkering done to it, I had spray painted a simple red spider onto it with a white smiley face layered on top of it that added to my whole irreverent vibe. The paint itself came from leftovers Ben and May had from spray painting a shelf like the American flag. The most important thing I'd made was my harness. The durability I got from my brute power took time for me to build up, so I needed something to prevent me from snapping my neck or breaking my spine by swinging too fast. The web shooters were my favorite though, a blend of Tinkertech and my own. The formula for my web fluid hadn't changed much since Oscorp, but the way I was able to use it absolutely had. I had taken inspiration from a spider's legs when thinking about how my web fluid could be best deployed, but I didn't have any idea how to make the arms as small and precise as I needed them to be. It wasn't until I got my powers that I actually had any idea how to make that work, getting them to weave the fluid into ropes that I could use to swing or pull things forward with. The tensile strength was crazy strong as well. Currently, the web shooters were rather clunky bracelets connected to a pair of red gloves. I had ideas on how to slim it down, but it would take me time to iron that out in a way that didn't render the whole thing too battery dependent. I slipped on the gloves and made sure the clasps on the shooters themselves were secure. I was already wearing the bottom half of my costume, an old pair of Ben's work pants he had grown out of decades ago. They were made of this baggy fabric that wasn't too constricting and had lots of pockets. I appreciated that. It was nice to be able to carry around some tools and little devices. Little devices, as far as I understood, seemed to be my specialty. Compact, covert gadgets. Ben and I watched this spy movie a week ago, and I had to make us leave the theater in the middle of it because I couldn't get all the ideas for pen guns and umbrella shield generators out of my head, neither of which I even ended up finishing. The pen gun was too violent, and I couldn't think of any other way to power the umbrella than a small nuclear power cell, and I didn't want to do that. Tinker problems, I guess. Aside from my discarded attempts at a cool spy gadget, I have a pair of special goggles that I made to help me see clearly since I can't wear glasses whilst in costume. I even went a step further with them and managed to cram in zoom and night vision features. And besides that, I didn't really have much else. Had a dozen work in progress projects back in the workshop slash bedroom, but nothing that I could trust out on the field. So I stuck to what I could trust: my webs, my harness, and my goggles. It was the evening of my fourth day back at school. The week itself was going as smoothly as the first day back. I still had that weird trauma bond thing with Flash going on, and Cindy's been sitting with me at lunch. We chatted about random topics, and sometimes her friend Liz joined us. Liz was nice, but I don't think we'd ever speak to each other if not for Cindy. But she was cool. But all of that could barely cement itself in my mind at the moment, since it was racing with ideas for what I could do for my 500,000 followers special. My main idea was somehow having another encounter with Death Killer. It would be easy enough to find him. I trailed him for a little bit after our last fight. I didn't see him unmask or anything like that. I just wanted to see if he really had a lair. Guy bragged about his lair in our last fight Saturday. I had been kind of jealous that he might have his own space and wanted to see it for myself. He really did have one. It looked like he rented out an apartment for his cape identity to store stuff in. It made me suspect he lived with family friends outside the costume. I knew where he hung up his skull mask, but it just wouldn't feel right to my audience if I broke into his apartment to fight him without some kind of setup. The solution was simple, though. Just catch him in the act of doing something criminal, so I have an excuse to break into his apartment and have a comedic confrontation. With that goal in mind, I set out to find where my favorite wannabe villain was doing business today. Death Killer never operated outside of Brooklyn. I was pretty sure he was a new cape like myself and was probably too scared to operate anywhere that served as claimed territory of any of the gangs. So as far as I knew, he just resorted to petty burglary where he knew it was mostly safe. We were the same like that, just dipping our toes into the water, blowing off some steam. Since I didn't know for sure where he'd be or even if he'd be out in costume, I decided to locate his apartment and fan out from there. That meant it was swinging time, which itself meant I need to make it up to the roof. I opened my window and imagined a contact between me and the surface of the wall. One of my powers was this tethering ability. I could attach myself to a surface and walk or run on it as if I was on the ground. Not the most maneuverable thing, but I was pretty sure it still counted as a mover power. The downside to this tethering power is that my connection to the surface is usually really weak. If I stumble, trip, or get hit by something, I'll become untethered and fall to my doom. Rather than walk on walls, I usually just crawled. The tether was stronger the more points of contact I had. I crawled up to the top of the roof and lined up a good anchor point to start swinging from. I fired out a strand of rope and tested the connection before running back and leaping off the building, holding tight onto the rope. There was nothing that felt more liberating than swinging around the city. Having all these powers was cool and all, but this feeling right now could never be beat by anything. When I got into the air, I could let all my troubles go, no more guilt or shame. While swinging, I could be free of responsibility. The only thing that mattered was where I was headed, and where I shot the next web. I had already noted a good anchor point to attach my web at to get maximum distance, and before I could even begin to fully fall, I aimed my wrist, pressed the button of the web shooter, and a highly dense and tensile strong string of web shot out and attached itself to a nearby telephone pole, and I started swinging again. Swinging took a lot of mental focus. I spotted another decent-looking anchor point that I shot for, but as I did, I felt my danger sense kick in. I let go of the web and shot another for a landing point and pulled myself down to recollect. My thinker power didn't help me choose good anchor points, but it did let me know if I chose a bad one. It never told me what would happen if I committed, and I never pursued that answer, so I focused on choosing just the best points. And that process felt like a bit of a mental puzzle in its own right, but little mental puzzles were just my thing, so I figured my way through it with no problem. I made it to Death Killer's apartment building quicker than I'd expected. I used my surface cranking power to land on the side of the building and began to climb my way up it. I made sure my harness was on tight in case I fell. And then I made it to the top of the apartment without any issues, and I felt the strength and endurance of my brute power starting to build up in response to the strain of the climb and the swing here. I chose a good perch and began scanning the area with the zoom function of my goggles. If I were an edgy loner with a nickname like Death Killer, where would I go to blow off some steam? I spoke to myself aloud to keep my boredom at bay. A store? In broad daylight? No, not fitting enough. If he'd rob a store, it would be dark around. So he might be someplace dark then. So, an alleyway? What a corny place to stage a robbery. But capes are all about corniness, right? Let's check that one. Spotting a potential robbery alleyway, I jumped off the edge of the roof. I made it through the alleyway I spotted and landed on a roof's edge above it. And what do you know? I struck gold on my first try. Death Killer was actually down there. I reached into my backpack that I still carried with me and pulled out my camera. Not Tinker Tech, at least yet. Ben bought it for me last year for my birthday, and I've been using it for itsy bitsy videos for the past couple weeks. Really, Death Killer? An alleyway this close to your lair? You gotta step up your game, my guy. I whispered to myself as I watched the scene below me unfold through the lens of my camera. The scene below me was of a woman in her 30s being faced down by a man in a black hoodie with the words Death Killer spray painted on it like it was a metal band name. The guy couldn't have been any older than 20. He was wearing army green cargo pants. The only thing that really shouted cape about him was the skull mask he wore that had this ghostly green shade to it. What do you want from me? The woman spoke, her voice shaky. Death Killer responded in the fakest, most gravelly voice you've heard from someone whose natural speaking voice was of a much higher register. Just drop the purse and any of the money you got on you and walk away like nothing happened. Death Killer held up his hand with his palm facing upward. A bit of smoky mist that I had known from experience was intensely cold began wisping out from his palm. The mist floated just a bit above his palm, remaining there. Energy in little static tendrils burst out and wrapped around the mist and then hardened, encasing the fog in a glowing green force field in the shape of a skull. The skull left Death Killer's palm and floated over to hover beside the woman. "'Cause if you don't, then something bad really is gonna happen. And you aren't gonna like it." To emphasize his point, the skull opened its jaw and let out a menacing bit of fog. She had probably felt a little bit of a chill, but from what I knew about DK's powers, that much mist wouldn't hurt her. I pointed the camera at myself to provide a bit of color commentary. As far as threats go from our favorite killer of death, I'd give that a 6 out of 10. He really would have benefited from summoning that skull before he started mugging her. I turned the camera back around in time to see the woman set her purse down and begin to slowly walk away, and after a bit of distance, she broke into a run. Death Killer carried himself smugly as he picked up the bag and began to walk off. I stopped the recording there, stood up, and walked over to the center of the roof. Clearing my throat, I prepared myself to record another segment of the video. I turned the video back on and pointed the camera at myself. As y'all just saw right there, my old pal Death Killer is running around and robbing poor defenseless ladies. Well, I don't really know for sure that she was poor, but she's probably poor now. And it just goes to show that he has not changed his ways whatsoever. So I plan to hold a bit of an intervention. I'll see you guys there. I stopped the recording and began the next phase of my plan. Go inside of his apartment and wait for him to return to give him the intervention of the century by kicking his ass and getting the money back to the victim. This was gonna get so many likes. I made my way back to his apartment. Not wanting to go through the front door in costume, I decided to take an outside approach and go through one of the windows on the outside of the building. It was laughably easy. I just climbed around the building and used a little spray of web fluid to get a solid grip on the window to pull it up. Then I was in Death Killer's apartment. It was practically unfurnished, just a small futon for him to rest on, and a kitchen he kept stocked up with a bit of food. This simply could not be the man's main place of living. He probably rented this place using the money he stole from people like that woman from earlier and uses it to store other things he stole or just rest. My first order of business was writing Death Killer a little note. I ripped out a piece of paper from my notebook and wrote, "Don't take your mask off," and signed it with a little scribble of a spider and taped it to the front of the door. I planned to record him after all when he came in, and though I do joke around with this stuff, I'm not about to go and break the unwritten rules by ousting someone's secret identity. Then I set up the scene. I set up my camera, angled at the door, and connected a string of web to the ceiling and attached the camera to it. It would hold it in place so I didn't have to when we fought. Then I activated the 2 web shooters on my shoulder pads to attach to the ceiling as well, as I hung there and waited. It took Death Killer about 20 minutes to arrive, after I had already set up, and I could tell he was coming by the sounds of his clunky steel-toed boots against the thin apartment building floor outside. I quickly pulled myself up against the furthermost corner of the room and turned on my camera. Alright everybody, I managed to find Death Killer's villainous lair. He should be here any second. Spider-Man, the fuck is this shit, man? You broke into my place? The door shook with an angry slam. I shook my head in disappointment. He was ruining the kayfabe. Well, yeah, but you're supposed to act like you don't know I did that. He shoved the door open, didn't even take the note off the door. I'm gonna beat you unconscious for this, Death Killer growled. The skull mask he wore left enough of his face exposed that I could see his mouth downturned into an angry grimace. You didn't think I'd look for it after you bragged about your lair? I couldn't just let you flex on me like that. It seemed that Deathkiller was not going to entertain the back and forth today, because mist began to pour from his entire body. Wispy tendrils of energy pulled the massive mists close together as they began to coalesce into one large skull. Whoa, you've been holding out on me, man? Get out! Deathkiller roared as the giant skull came flying at me. Normally, I'd listen to the demand like that, but fans were expecting something big. I couldn't let the itsy bits down. DK, come on! The buzzing sense on the back of my neck flared up, my power alerting me of the danger I could clearly see in front of me. I shot my hands into the air and fired 2 strands of webs, yanked myself onto the ceiling, then stuck myself there with my power. Deathkiller's skull rushed forward just as I pulled myself out of its path. It just barely stopped before slamming into the wall. I fired a few bursts of webs at Deathkiller from my spot on the ceiling. He was already in the process of creating another skull projection. I wasn't the best shot, but I landed a few, the impact pushing him hard enough for him to back out of the door. I leapt down and ran after him. The giant skull was big, and just as I had hoped, it couldn't fit through the doorway after me. Deathkiller was still concentrating on making more skulls to attack me. I closed the distance. The mist from the forming skulls is colder than anything I'd really ever like to experience, but I only needed to experience it for a few seconds. I pushed him with what brute strength I'd built up left, and sent him knocking into the door of his neighbors across the hall. I really hope your neighbors aren't home. I raised my web shooters, aimed it for his wrists and ankles, and webbed him to the door. Deathkiller glared at me. We both knew I had about 3 minutes until the mist made my webs brittle enough for him to break. Breathe, man, I said, taking a breath myself. The footage is gonna be... I paused, turned around, and realized the best shots were completely obscured by his big-ass skull. Okay, so it's not gonna be killer, but, most of it's good, I think. Deathkiller sighed from his position on the door. Yeah, but I know a way I can help you make it better. I shook my head. I'm not letting you out of the webs, man. I'm gonna blast new ones on you if anything. Deathkiller looked ticked that I had him bought into that. We've got the footage we got. I don't want my videos to feel fake, you know? I hit him with some more webs just to be safe. The ones keeping him stuck to the door were already looking hard and brittle. I felt my danger sense tingle, so as was becoming a reflex for me, I yanked myself onto the ceiling. The skull still in Deathkiller's apartment had exploded. Flakes of green force fields shot out like glass shrapnel, and mist erupted all over the villain's lair. I was glad to still not be in there. Fuck! We'd both exclaimed at the same time. I looked at a confused Deathkiller, which only furthered my confusion. Why do you look so surprised? You're the one who did that! Deathkiller shook his head at me. I didn't mean to. It just timed out. And I don't want my shit frozen, man. I've got paintings in there under the futon. Nice ones that I was gonna hang up. Your camera's still in there, right? Let me get out of these webs and I can get your shit before it freezes. His anger at me had completely dissipated at this point. He really was just worried about his stuff. Yeah, okay. I shook my head. Please, that camera's from my uncle? He looked at me with an expression that I couldn't gauge with the mask, but he nodded. Yeah. Deathkiller busted out from the webs. I didn't reapply them, and he went running into the area his power had transformed into a frigid disaster zone. He came back with my camera in one hand and a bunch of gold-framed paintings under his shoulder. You shouldn't break into people's lairs, man. It's not cool. He held the camera out and pulled it away from me when I went to grab it. Come on, say you're sorry, or at least thank me for getting your camera. I had to stand on the futon to grab it. Okay, so maybe Deathkiller was cooler than I thought. Yeah, sorry, man. Thanks. The smile that appeared on his face quickly disappeared when I added, but I'm still gonna need that woman's bag back. The returning stuff part is always a big draw for the emotional crowd. Deathkiller sighed and walked back into his lair for the bag and came back with it. Okay, just never come here again? The fights are fun, but I live here. I had kind of skirted around villain and hero courtesy by doing this in the first place. Yeah, for sure. Next time I'll keep the surprises to places with more room to kick ass. I took the bag from Deathkiller and ran down the hall, then right out of the fire escape. Not long after my encounter with Deathkiller, I had made it back home and began editing my 500,000 followers special. There were some good scenes here, though a large portion of the footage from Deathkiller's lair was of his giant skull failing to fit through the doorway, and blocking the view of our face-off in the hallway. I could maybe use it in some kind of blooper reel, but it made the video come up short a bit lengthwise, and I wanted a bit more to spice up the video. I was trying to think of a way to make it better, but I was getting too into my head about it, so I decided to call off and take a look at PHO. When I logged in, I noticed I had a ping from my DMs, and when I clicked it, I just knew that this would save my 500k special. The message was from a kid who fancied himself my nemesis. Private message from Shooting Star 10. Shooting Star 10. Hey Itsy Bitsy, do you want to race again today? Shooting Star 10. Or I'll unleash my powers on the banks. The kid went by Kid Astronomy, and much like a kid would want to do, he just wanted to mess around with his powers. It also seemed like he was a fan of mine, and when he got his powers, he thought it would be fun to make videos together as my nemesis and rival. I went along with it. I wasn't sure what was going on in his life, but it seemed like he needed someone who also had powers to hang around, and I indulged him. It was better than going down a death killer route anyways. Itsy Bitsy Spider-Man. Sure, want to meet up at the same place as last time? Shooting Star 10. Yeah, that's cool. Itsy Bitsy Spider-Man. Alright, see you there. I put my computer in rest mode, gathered my bag and camera, then went downstairs to head out. As I did, I saw Aunt May, who's starting to prepare dinner. Oh, Peter, are you headed out? Yeah, sorry, I should be back soon. Was just gonna meet with a friend for a little bit. I wasn't sure I could fully call Kid Astronomy a friend, but he definitely wasn't an enemy. She nodded in understanding. Okay, just make sure you're back in time for dinner. Ben should be on his way home soon as well. I waved back as I left. Gotcha, love you. As I darted out the door, I could faintly hear May's reply of, I love you too. As I usually did, I ran around the house to the backyard under the cover of a fence to slip on my costume, and then using a tree, I yanked myself into the air to find a rooftop. The same rooftop Kid and I used as a meeting point. Kid was already waiting for me as I got there. Wow, you got here fast, I remarked. He shrugged. I don't live far from here, and I wasn't doing anything. Kid Astronomy had a cape outfit of sorts. It was one of the costumes that you get from a Halloween store. It was one of the superhero costumes with the fake muscles and flimsy masks to boot. It was merch for one of the Triumvirate themselves, Legend. It was kinda charming, because if he was walking around the streets, you'd just think he was a kid playing pretend, but in reality he did have very real powers. Kid had laid some pillows down on the rooftops. The fact that he managed to climb up here with all that made me think he probably lived in this building, but I wouldn't force it out of him. I pointed to the pillows. Seems like you got yourself a nice setup. He smiled mischievously. Heh, yeah, pretty smart, huh? Now I don't have to worry about getting bruises when I use my powers and fall over. It is quite smart. So about this race, what kind are we doing this time? A loop or some kind of relay? I was pulling out my camera, getting ready to record. Kid brought a hand to his chin and thought. I guess we could race to the nearby school and back. Sounds like a plan, Kid Astronomy. And to let you in on an itsy bitsy secret, this is gonna go on my 500,000 follower special. I just had a run-in with Death Killer earlier, and this race is gonna be in the same video. As I said that, Kid Astronomy looked really excited. Whoa, really? He recollected himself. I mean, that's only natural. I am your nemesis after all, so it makes sense. It really does, doesn't it? I chuckled a little bit. I quickly checked my harness and web shooters to make sure they're good to go. Alright, ready? Kid Astronomy got himself into position. He sat down on the pillows and cupped his hands into a circle. Blue light filled the gap between his hands, and Kid nodded to me. I'm ready, Itsy Bitsy, but are you ready to lose? I stepped up to the ledge, my danger sense rolling out the first 2 anchor points I eyed, and found one that didn't trigger any buzzing. Without looking back at Kid, I responded, Nah, I'm ready to win. Kid Astronomy reacted by laughing. So cool! The blaster released a bolt of energy from his hands and fell back onto his pillows. I leapt down from the roof and dived. I trusted my harness to keep me alive before any of my other powers built up enough energy. I pulled up and fired my webs at a corner of one of the taller buildings in this part of Brooklyn. The speed I was building from the dive let me pull myself up fast. I swung up and was neck and neck with Kid Astronomy's projectile. He called it the Starbolt. He could apparently see through it, and his body would completely space out while he used it. The longer it flew without hitting something, the faster it became. The Starbolt would also hit harder when it did hit something. The starbolt twinkled, as if surprised to see me, and suddenly sped up. I fired 2 strands of webs at the building in front of us to web pull myself forward so I could maintain my current lead. I yanked myself over to the right to go around it. Kid Astronomy, however, had the starbolt fly upwards and over the building. The change in altitude probably took him longer than expected. I passed over an alleyway. Someone ran out one of the buildings from a side door leading out of the alleyway. He was wearing a purple sweatshirt and hauling a big duffel bag. A woman ran out after him. She saw me swinging overhead and yelled at me. "He's a thief! That's our money! Please do something!" I glanced at them. If I wasn't busy, I'd have helped her. But this wasn't my problem. "Sorry, lady, not my problem." I swung past, ignoring the duffel bag bandit and swinging ahead of the starbolt. "You ass!" I heard the woman yell. Some people could be so self-absorbed. Did she expect me to just quit what I was doing any time someone needed help? I had a race to win, and I needed to make it to the halfway point quickly to turn around soon, or the starbolt would be too fast for me to keep up. "Come on!" I shouted. "Come on!" I swung with all the strength my arms allowed and touched down on the building by the school. I took the second I had earned, the stretch, and leapt off the roof to keep swinging. I heard a gunshot some distance away as I swung my way back to the roof. The starbolt was right next to me, though. I needed to keep moving so I didn't have time to check it out. Besides, paramedics could handle it if someone got hurt. I landed on the roof seconds before the starbolt thudded into the roof, leaving a crack in the concrete. "I win!" I celebrated with a little victory dance. "You did!" Good Astronomy was awake now. "I'm impressed you can keep doing this without flying." I nodded. It really was impressive. "Thanks, kid. This was—" My phone ringing interrupted me. I pulled it out and saw it was May. "Fun. Hold on for just a second, kid. I probably have to take this." I was a little irritated to have my outing interrupted, but I took the call anyway. "What's up? This isn't a great time for me, can—" May interrupted me. "It's about Ben, Peter." She sounded so terrified. "These paramedics called. They said he got shot trying to stop a robbery. They're not sure if they made it in time, but are taking him to the hospital." She kept going on, but I was frozen. Ben had been shot? That alleyway where I let that thief go had been pretty close to where I heard a gunshot. Thinking about it now, Ben would have passed by that place on his way home. I started swinging back towards that alley. Kid Astronomy stared at me, but I didn't have time to explain. I tuned back into May's voice. "Peter, I'm on my way to the hospital. Can you try to be there too? I need you, kiddo." I wanted to tell her I would be. I wanted to be there for my aunt like she and Ben had been there for my whole life. Instead, I told her, "I don't know." She let out what sounded like a sob. "Peter, wait, are you running? You sound winded." "I can't really talk right now, I'm sorry." I hung up and shoved the phone back into my pocket. It rang again, but I just ignored it. I had to know. If what I worried had happened was true, I may as well have shot Ben myself. Now able to swing with both my hands free, I made it over to that alleyway, and sure enough, I heard sirens. As soon as I caught up to that ambulance, I couldn't stop myself. I landed on the roof. "What the hell? Did something fall on us?" one of the paramedics asked. I didn't have time for any of this. So overwhelmed with panic, I pried open the window of the ambulance and climbed inside. One paramedic, a young man with black messed up hair, stared at me widely. He grabbed a scalpel or some other sharp piece of medical equipment and pointed it at me. My danger sense didn't go off, so I ignored him. My focus lied solely in my uncle, lying on a stretcher. His eyes, which in this moment looked so cold, lit up with life again as he saw me. "Don't," he said, his voice so calm. Even when he sounded so weak, his voice carried this strength with it. So absorbed in myself, I hadn't noticed the paramedic getting closer with his maybe scalpel. Ben gestured for me to unmask. Seeing him like this, bleeding like this, I did as he asked without any hesitation. "This is my son, Peter." I wanted to bawl. I wanted to curl up into a ball and cry. I knew that was how my aunt and uncle saw me. They had raised me since my parents' death when I was less than a year old, but hearing him just say it like that broke me. I held his hand. The paramedic kept working, trying to keep Ben alive. The fact that he could even speak at all was a miracle. "I'm here, Ben." He squeezed my hand. Look at yourself, Peter. Look at all that you are capable of. I took stock of everything I could do. Everything I could do that I should have done to take out one unpowered thief without anyone getting hurt. How long have you known? He smiled. I didn't know how he could smile at me like that still. I meant what I said. You're my son, Peter. I've always known you do incredible things. I've been wasting them. Wasted them today. I could have. That thief? I could have stopped him. I didn't, and I. He brought my hand up to his face, bringing my eyes back up to meet his. You just needed time to see what I saw, Peter. There's no shame in that. I still felt ashamed, but it helped to hear him say that. What did you see? I asked him. I saw that you are capable of being so much more than just a joke. Something was going wrong. His hand started to spasm and shake. I held on to it tighter. Why'd you do it, Ben? Why'd you try to stop him? He looked me in my eyes and said, Because I could, and somebody had to. And then wrapped his other arm around me and whispered, Take care of May for me. The two of you are going to need each other. I didn't know how to respond to that. I didn't even want to hear it, but I just nodded and held his hand. Uncle Ben never made it to the hospital. He passed in the back of the ambulance, holding my hand. After I had processed it, one of the paramedics handed me my mask. You need to go. We'll take him to where he needs to go. He was talking about taking Ben's body to the hospital. Was referring to him as a body against protocol or something. But you have to get out of here. It occurred to me that they'd seen me unmask, and suddenly I froze up. The guy who threatened me with the maybe scalpel before put a hand on my shoulder. We're not going to tell anyone anything we saw, okay? Just get out of here so you can make your old man proud. I slid my mask back on and climbed out the way I came in.